3, 2, 1, take 2.
Look at these images. We must remain vigilant at all times
항상 경계의 고삐를
and be
늦추지
alert
말아야.
to their insidious attack on the mind,
이전에도 그러했듯이
for they have come before
이러한 공격은 또
and they will come again. America that has invaded 37 countries in the last 50 years. We have invaded none.
And that's a very respectable piece of history, and I can appreciate how much work goes into that. The first article I wrote was right after the fall of Barcelona in the school newspaper, and it was a lament about the rise of fascism in 1939.
Well, you spoke several times before about ideological subversion. That is a phrase that I'm afraid some Americans don't fully understand. When the Soviets used the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Ideological subversion is the slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB.
Actually, I guess one of the people who was the biggest influence in my life was an uncle who had never gone past 4th grade. He was, had a background in crime, then left-wing politics and all sorts of things. But he was a hunchback.
But it was a very lively place. He was a very bright guy. It was the 30s. There were a lot of emigres, so a lot of people were hanging around there. And in the evenings especially, it was sort of a literary political salon. Every kind of guys hanging around arguing and talking. And as a kid, like 11, 12 years old, the biggest excitement was to work the newsstand.
Or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country.
Welcome to the battlefield. Welcome to the war. Dedicated to freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, and individual rights. This leftist Islamic alliance is indicative of how very bad the war is.
Don't the consumer slaves of the West want to know why their forces are occupying our country?
What happened today is not extraordinary.
By one count, the United States has interfered in more than 80 foreign elections between 1946 and 2000. And that doesn't count U.S.-backed coups and invasions.
Have we ever tried to meddle in other countries' elections?
Oh, probably, but it was for the good of the system in order to avoid the communists from taking over. For example, in Europe, in 47, 48, 49, the Greeks and the Italians, we
don't do that now, though? We don't mess around other people's elections, Jim?
Only for a very good cause.
Can you do that? Do a Vine video on a former CIA director.
Only for a very good cause in the interests of democracy.
All right, thank you.
The list of countries where the U.S. has interfered is long.
You write in Manufacturing Consent that it's the primary function of the mass media in the United States to mobilize public support for the special interests that dominate the government and the private sector. What are those interests?
Well, if you want to understand the way any society works, ours or any other, the first place to look is who is in a position to make the decisions that determine the way the society functions. Societies differ, but in ours, the major decisions over what happens in the society, decisions over investment and production and distribution and so on, are in the hands of a relatively concentrated network of major corporations and conglomerates and investment firms and so on.
Do they care?
그럼 이 사실을 도대체 알기라도
Do they even know?
They are also the ones who staff the major executive positions in the government, and they're the ones who own the media, and they're the ones who have to be in a position to make the decisions. They have an overwhelmingly dominant role in the way life happens, what's done in the society. Within the economic system, by law and in principle, they dominate. The control over resources and the need to satisfy their interests imposes very sharp constraints on the political system and the ideological system.
When we talk about manufacturing of consent, whose consent is being manufactured?
We can, to start with, there are two different groups. We can get into more detail, but at the first level of approximation, there's two targets for propaganda.
The answer is that most of them don't know and don't care.
라는 것이다.
That most of them don't know and don't care.
라는 것이다.
One is what's sometimes called the political class. There's maybe 20% of the population which is relatively educated, more or less articulate. They play some kind of role in decision making. They're supposed to sort of participate in social life, either as managers or cultural managers, like, say, teachers and writers and so on.
Today, we're going to talk about the crisis in Spain. Yeah, we're going to talk about the crisis in Africa. Yeah, Russia. And I want to talk about the president of Russia.
Most of them don't know and don't care.
라는 것이다.
They're supposed to vote. They're supposed to play some role in the way economic and political and cultural life goes on. Now, their consent is crucial. It's one group that has to be deeply indoctrinated. Then there's maybe 80% of the population whose main function is to follow orders and not to think, and not to pay attention to anything.
Because their owners have full control over what they see and think.
And they're the ones who usually pay the costs. It's basically an institutional analysis of the major media, what we call a propaganda model. We're talking primarily about the national media, those media that sort of set a general agenda that others more or less adhere to the extent that they even pay much attention to national or international affairs. Now, the elite media are the sort of the agenda-setting media.
In 1893, the U.S. helped overthrow the Kingdom of Hawaii. 5 years later, in 1898, the U.S. invaded and occupied Cuba and Puerto Rico. A year later, it was the Philippines. Early 20th century interventions included Nicaragua, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, all in the 1910s.
In 1953, the U.S. helped overthrow the Iranian government. A year later, in 1954, the U.S.-backed coup in Guatemala, overthrowing the democratically elected leader of Guatemala, Jacobo Arbenz. Then in the 60s, the list grew to include, once again, the Dominican Republic, Indonesia, and the Congo. And that's just a partial list. Even with the end of the Cold War, U.S. interference overseas did not end.
World News. It's a soundbite that says that.
I just need $200. I take these real estate classes, and I'm back on my feet, baby.
There's a beachhead.
I think 628 is a good one. Yeah, but I think 6 is a good start.
It's Black History Month.
This is the operative soundbite for us. He's ours. He really knows how to time this.
He's got a minute for all the time, so that's.
I love this.
Violence is climbing at CCSD schools, and so now teachers, parents, and also students, they are pleading for some kind of change.
Okay,
and they do this in all sorts of ways, by selection of topics, by distribution of concerns, by emphasis and framing of issues, by filtering of information, by bounding of debate within certain limits.
When? Huh? You gonna pay for it?
Excuse me. I'll set up with the asshole. Goddamn thing.
2.5 minutes to air. No. 45 seconds.
They determine, they select, they shape, they control, they restrict in order to serve the interests of dominant elite groups in the society.
There is an unusual amount of attention focused today on the 5 nations of Central America.
These same methods are used to glorify the corporations
미화하는데
who make
쓰이고
these
있다.
products.
이것을 기업 선전이라고
This is
부른다.
called
예를 들면
corporate
제네럴
propaganda.
일렉트릭사는
For
의미한다. 진실은
And there is no such thing as enough profit for the capitalist.
없다라는 것이다.
This is democracy's diary. Here for our instruction are triumphs and disasters, the pattern of life's changing fabric. Here is great journalism, a revelation of the past, a guide to the present, and a clue to the future.
Putin, Putin, listen to me. I have very important message to you. The message is, and the president of China, oh, I didn't finish Russia. Thank you to correct me, First Lady. Damn. Thank you.
I can't guarantee that. I can't guarantee that. I can't guarantee that. I can't guarantee that. But I know, you know, that old thing, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. I don't know. Well, look. Thank you, Boris, and I want to thank that fellow down under. Thank you very much, pal. Appreciate it, Mr. Prime Minister. Guess what?
Thank you very much. God bless you. And God bless.
Thank you all. Hallelujah. Clap to your president. Clap to your president right now.
A generation ahead.
So love me now, so love me, so love me now.